Campbell, you wrote a book intriguingly titled Unmasking the Entrepreneur, which made me think of, not that we want to dwell on CEOs and their salaries, and apologies to any CEOs in the audience, but they often remind me of a kind of, feudal princeling class that's sort of emerged lately. But what we're told is that without paying them vast amounts of money, we won't be able to attract them and their talent to the jobs that we need them to do, and they will just simply go overseas and our economy will suffer. Is there something inherently mythical about this cult of the CEO and the business superstar?
Yeah, in the book, it's that kind of story that we were trying to take apart. We were trying to ask why those stories are told, despite how improbable they are. And I mean, I'm not entirely sure it's a feudal idea so much as the entrepreneur is a 19th century idea. The idea of a small trader who will go and set up a firm, will go and make a great empire all by themselves. And one of the things that I was concerned to argue in the book is that through the 20th century, work becomes increasingly cooperative. We extend the division of labour, we work with each other. And almost any kind of work that we do today requires a vast repository of socially cooperative skills. And that socialisation of work, if you like, which takes place through the 20th century, seems to render anachronistic the idea of the entrepreneur. It makes the entrepreneur a figure of a time past, a time when an individual could make great empires all by themselves. Small business people, of course, can make a small business, but to create a great empire requires the work of a great number of others.
This is heresy, surely. And what was the response to this thesis?
Well, I mean, the book is a critique of the idea of the entrepreneur. It's a critical analysis of the categories around which we think things like entrepreneurship. And one of the things that was remarkable to us as we undertook the research, and it was a process of 10 years that the book involved, was the remarkably uncritical manner with which scholars who are ostensibly working on entrepreneurship treated their subject matter. In most any discipline, you'd think if someone's studying splatter films or anything else, an academic is going to critically scrutinise their material. Now, when it came to the category of the entrepreneur and many of the other economic categories around it, what we found was almost just vulgar apologetics.
Does that chime with you, Phoebe?
Yes, it does chime with me. And if I might interject just to back up some of the stuff that Bernard has said, I mean, Robert Wade, who's from the London School of Economics, when he was over here in 2009, he said that with looking at this most recent recession, that it was pretty obvious that it was going to happen because we had tipped near the same figures of concentration of wealth as preceded the Great Depression. From 1992 to 2007, you saw a 392% increase in the wealth of the wealthiest people in America, and basically the top 20% owned 87.7% of the wealth. Now, the problem with that is that when wealthy people get income, they tend to invest them into assets, and that stops it circulating in terms of its disposable income around the market. But I would extend on from what Campbell just said in terms of the CEO as a kind of, I think the CEO forms a kind of aspirational function within politics, that we get this kind of shift as we move from a society that is based on this idea, under a feudal model, that you're just sort of born into a class that is where your position is in life. As we shift into capitalism, you get this idea or this kind of myth that anyone can kind of progress upwards, and that's something I think that sustains the system, or sustains perhaps that greed at the top in terms of the accumulation of wealth.
And one of the great myths of the idea that the entrepreneur is the one that creates the value and therefore should capture a lot of that value is that we actually have entrepreneurs who do create companies, whereas when you look at what's actually happening with income and with CEO salaries, we're actually talking about managers, not about entrepreneurs. And when you look at what the true entrepreneurs are saying these days, the likes of Peter Thiel, the guy behind PayPal, who is also a major shareholder in Xero and was one of the key investors in Facebook, even the likes of Steve Jobs, who, regardless of whether you like how he operated, actually created something and worked with others to create something. But the real growth in salaries and in incomes is not from those people who actually create value as leaders of companies with great ideas that work with others, but of managers. and often of companies that are actually creating, they're just ladling debt onto large chunks of the population. That's not creating, that's essentially enabling a shift of wealth from one group to another, and is ultimately destructive. You also get this problem where remuneration committees of boards enter into this ultimately pointless exercise of chasing each other's salaries. When a remuneration committee looks at other CEOs and other companies, they go, well, to keep our CEO, we have to pay them around about what the other CEOs are paying. And then the other CEOs look at the others and go, well, we have to pay what they're paying. So you get this horrible circular logic up where CEO salaries, these are managers' salaries, not entrepreneurs' salaries, actually rise much faster than the incomes of those who are working for them, creating this eventually destructive situation where you have, as we were talking about earlier, the idea that companies now have to work together, people have to work together, so CEOs have to go into meetings with others and have discussions rather than just order them to do things. But how do you have a serious discussion with someone who's earning 500 times more than you do? How do you challenge their ideas? How do you come up with a suggestion for them and not think, actually, this great idea I just had is not going to make me money, it's going to make him or her money?
What do you think motivates the CEOs or that stratum of business operators to want those kind of salaries and to look in the mirror and feel justified? I mean, can we call it greed? If you think one working definition of greed is something like the inordinate desire to possess wealth, goods, or objects of abstract value with the intention to keep it for oneself, far beyond the dictates of basic survival and comfort. That seems to me a fairly good working definition of executive pay scales, really. Are they, if you talk about them as models, as role models, or as aspirational figures, what are they teaching anyone?
Well, what they're doing is working in a relative world where they compare themselves to their fellow masters of the universe and saying, well, he or she's got a Ferrari 450 worth 2 million. I've got to have a Ferrari 550 worth 2.5 million. And it's got to the point now, unfortunately, and if you're looking for some examples of journalism and work on this, Chrystia Freeland has done a fantastic book about the growth of the plutocracy, effectively an international class of business leaders, CEOs, thinkers who earn a lot and have disconnected themselves from the rest of the world. And you have these bizarre situations where people lust after things that are completely pointless, but you need to have them to be up with the Joneses. And a good example of that is today in Kazakhstan, a bank has launched a credit card that's only available to its top 100 clients. It is made of gold, pure gold, and encrusted with diamonds. And it's a Visa Infinite card. And not
Which
only
only warlords can have, I imagine. If it's
yes, that's right. And it's so juicy that you can't actually use it with a magnetic stripe because the gold doesn't make the magnetic stripe work, but it does have the chip, so you can slide it in and use it. But that really is not about anything real. It's about how do I compare myself with my fellow plutocrat or warlord.
Well, yes, Campbell.
I sense that a lot of these questions turn on exactly this definition that you've given here of greed as being something which is a yearning which is inordinate. Yeah? It's beyond what's reasonable. And what's reasonable, of course, is defined within a particular order, within a particular state of affairs in which we say this is okay. So the question is that in certain kind of orders, in certain kind of ways in which people imagine the world, they imagine that it's quite right for them to have these things. These things are, these platinum, these credit cards, the infinity credit cards and so forth, are treated as an entitlement. And so there seems to be nothing unusual about that. But when one charges someone else of greed, one's usually suggesting that you've broken the order. You've gone outside what is a normal desire. Yeah? And this is one of the reasons why the category of greed is, for me, a fundamentally moral matter, It's a moral matter in which you charge someone else, usually someone else, not usually yourself.
No, of course not.
Usually someone else, you charge them with breaking the proper order of what one may legitimately desire. Yeah? That's why the category of greed is about the policing of desire and the policing of the desires of other people.
Yeah, there's this delicious statement that the Republicans espouse in the United States, where they say that they justify their wealth by saying they've never been employed by a poor person. It seems a perfectly irrefutable argument. I wonder if there is a fallacy in it.
Who'd like to field that one?
Well, the trouble is that not wanting to get too partisan about it or too American about it, but the Republicans are the biggest spenders of military spending through the history of the Republican presidents. And that military spending is funded by taxpayers, who are all, by definition, mostly poorer than Republicans. Secondly, the too big to fail banks that have expanded even more since the 2008 crisis were essentially guaranteed and supported by lots and lots of poor people in the form of taxpayers. So, several steps removed, Republicans who say I've never been employed by a poor person should actually be saying I only still exist because of poor people.